Hello everybody. It's great to be here at Stafford. Fantastic facilities here. It's like quite a change from when I was studying programming in those days. They didn't do games courses. I don't know whether any of you are familiar with the NextGen Skills Academy. The NextGen Skills Academy is a government-funded body that's basically developing qualifications, apprenticeships, and short courses tailored to VFX, animation and games, basically with industry input, creating masterclasses and courses that will basically give people the skills they need to go out and work in the games industry and be able to come straight into a studio and know roughly what they're going to be, what they need to do, and really be effective from day one. I don't know, do we have anybody here on the L3 diploma course that NextGen have started this year? No? No? Okay, cool. So I will start off with my background. My name is Mark Washbrook. I'm actually standing in for Marcia, who is going to be doing this talk. My background, I started off in the games industry about 25 years ago as a programmer working on a Commodore 64. I joined Argonaut after doing a degree in computer science, where in those days they didn't believe in doing video games because it wasn't proper coding. And I joined Argonaut working in a warehouse in Colindale that we gradually converted. Started as a programmer, got talked into becoming a producer, and before I left I headed up their new projects group and had worked with some of the concept teams within the studio to develop 5 concepts that we pitched and signed to publishers. After Argonaut I set up my own company, Foob Industries, with a few friends, and the information that we're going to cover in the slides today is some of the information that I wish I'd had back then when I'd started, because we just didn't know that stuff. After Foob Industries, I set up a number of studios, Kuju London, which is now Headstrong Games, Rockstar London. I spent some time at Sony working on their Wonderbook, and I set up the Blast Furnace with a bunch of other studio heads, which is a mobile studio that we set up for Activision. More recently, I've been doing some work for the NextGen Skills Academy and working with a small startup with some guys I used to work with, Fierce Kaiju, who are developing VR games. So they've launched a Gear VR title and they're working on some more VR concepts now. Over that 25 years, I've worked on a few games. I've worked on early 8-bit games. I've done some artwork, I've done some programming. The early days were great because you got a chance to do just about everything. I have probably had about the same amount of games canned as I have got finished. One of the things that I really value from my early days in the industry working at Argonaut was we were all learning as we went. We built our own tools, we built our own editors, we built the games from scratch. So it was a fresh engine with every game that you did. And we learned a lot. We got a lot of games canned, but we learned a lot and we developed a lot of different genres, probably the most valuable part of my career, I think. And so I've worked on console AAA titles, worked on mobile, worked on free-to-play, worked on Wonderbook, the augmented reality book that Sony developed, and more recently worked on Viral, which was a virtual reality game for the Gear VR. So it's a really exciting time in the industry right now. 25 years and it feels like we're only really just getting started. The markets are getting really, really big. There are, I think the recent ESA study, 155 million gamers in the States playing games right now, which is a fantastic number. It means the audience is really big, it's really broad, and there's a great opportunity to get into the industry right now, not just to work for other studios, but to contract work for yourself or to set up your own studios. At the end of the day, developing games is all about having great ideas and the code and art skills to execute on that. Well, that's what we thought back then, but actually that isn't the case. So I'm going to start on value chains, which sounds really boring, but basically for a boxed product game, there is a value chain from creating your game at the beginning and getting it to the player at the end. There are 5 different roles there. The developer, which I think you're all aware of and know what that is. You develop the game, it's usually your own idea, or someone will come to you, a publisher might come to you with an IP or a license that they want you to develop. The publisher finances the development of the title, not just the development of the game, but the marketing. They pay for the manufacturing, they collect the revenue, and they sell the game into the retailers. You have a distributor, which is a company with a load of lorries that shift boxes that take them from manufacture to the shops. And you have a format holder who promotes the console format and manages that portfolio of games. Then you have the retailer, the shop that is where the games are sold. You're all familiar with that. Oops, what have I done? So one of the things that always confused me at the beginning, everybody talked about first party, second party, and third party, and we always wondered what those were. First party is the format holder, Sony. So Sony and its internal studios. A second party relationship is a publisher paying for those titles, owning those studios. So it would be like Ubisoft with Assassin's Creed. And then you have third party relationships, which is the developer, often signed to a publisher. So, as a bit of a fun exercise, you've got this chain of relationships that are selling the game. You develop it, and it gets sold all the way down the line to the player. And when you've done that, you get 20% tax added to the product, and it goes on the shelves, let's say, for £48. So £40 somewhere lies within the beginning of that process to the end. Would anybody like to guess what they think the developer receives out of that £40? About a tenner? £5? £3? Okay. That's just not a bad set of guesses. That's what it looks like. So this is averaged out. This is modelled on 20% of publisher receipts. You can get better deals like that. If you're a really strong team, you've got a really unique IP, something special that the publisher wants, you could get that up to 25%. If it's not so special and you've got a publisher that's negotiating hard, it could be lower than that. So that's where the money goes. So when you see all those millions of pounds that are being made on those games, that's the spread of where the money ends up. It's a useful thing to know going in at the beginning. So then we have the internet, great internet, that brought about digital product delivery. So quite obviously, we dropped the retailer at that point. The work that the retailer did doesn't get lost though. The retailer role still has to be carried out. So the format holder takes on that role. So your App Store, Google Play, Steam still has to sell the game to the player, still has to deliver the game to the player, still has to promote that game. So that work, when you do digital delivery, doesn't mean that role gets lost. It just gets absorbed into the format holder. I should just go back. Can I just go back? The distributor, obviously, that role now is gone because there's no boxes to shift, which is great, which is cheaper, which means more money comes back to everybody else. The value chain for indies is slightly different. So if you look at that, you've got no distributor, the format holders doing the retail job. You then go to the indie. The distributor now is back in the form of an aggregator, someone like, say, Chilingo, who build up a portfolio of games and promote those games on the stores for you. They have the relationship with the format holders that allows you to get featured, that gives you visibility so that people know your game is there and will go out and buy it. Publisher still continues to finance the development of the game, although I would say nowadays you've got quite a lot of government funding coming in to support new startups, and you've got different types of VC models that will allow project funding so that you don't necessarily have to go to a publisher to do that. Obviously, as an indie, what you really want to do is hold on to your IP. That's the valuable thing. That's the thing from day one that we've always found a really difficult thing to do. The opportunity to do that now is much greater, I think, than it was in the early days. Just make sure I'm sticking to my time. So the publisher role can get absorbed into the developer. The important thing to remember when that happens is, as a developer, if you're sitting in your bedroom making a game with a few friends, Skyping every day, this work still needs to get done by someone. It doesn't just disappear. If it does disappear, it means it's not getting done, and not getting done will have an impact on the game sales. So there was the kind of indie revolution started when really Apple made the iPhone and mobile just became massive. The barriers to entry were really low. It was, what, 100 quid for an Apple developer license, and you could then just go build your game, publish it. You didn't have to go through all that expense. It was great in the beginning days because there weren't very many games in the App Store, so it was easy to get noticed. It was easy to get those sales. And quite a lot of people who have been in the industry for a really long time jumped ship at that point and left the big studios to set up their small indie studios. Some were a great success, a lot struggled, and a lot didn't make money. And the perception was this is what the chain looked like to the indies. They forgot about all of this that needs to get done. And as the store got more and more populated, it got harder and harder to get discovered, harder to get noticed, harder to get those sales. And then what happened was all those indies that were struggling to get their titles noticed started moving back to console predominantly. So the thing to remember is you're creating a game, it's your creative love. It's the best thing since sliced bread. You've got this fantastic game, but it has to be sold, and it's a selling job. It's a selling job that has to be done within your team. And just going back to the value chain, the way that this has always worked is the developer sells the game to the publisher. The publisher has certain requirements that they want to see when they're looking and selecting games. The publisher then has to go and sell that to the format holder, to the retailer, and sell it to the player, which is what the format holder and retailer do. But the message starts here, and it gets passed down. So when you're doing that selling, it needs to be a strong message. It needs to be concise, and it needs to give them everything that they need to be able to do that selling process for you if you're not there, which largely you're not. The publisher spends time talking to the retailers. The position that those boxes end up on the shelves isn't an accident. They pay for those positions. They pay for the end displays. They pay to get that prominence there in the shops. And they put a lot of money and a lot of relationship work into doing that. So if you're going indie, that job still needs to get done. Similarly, they sell it into the format holder. The format holder will obviously be looking for things like titles that they can bundle with their hardware, exclusives like FIFA and Microsoft, which also gives the publisher additional funding for those titles. So it's easy when you're at this end to forget about the stuff that's happening here and further down the line. That's your opportunity at success. So, just a rough idea of quantities of games. This is really, really average, very, very rough. But if you, I don't know whether any of you have heard of the UK Games Fund. It's the new initiative set up for startups funding prototypes with budgets of between 25 and 50k. And it's only just been announced. They had 300 separate companies apply for those prototype grants. There will be about maybe 30 a year. It's really competitive. There's a lot of people out there trying to get the funding to make their games. And when you look at it this way, a developer is developing maybe 1, maybe 2 titles a year, maybe less. The publisher will have 10 to 30 titles in their portfolio. So you're looking for a slot if you're selling to a publisher in 10 to 30 titles. consider how many other people are pitching titles at the same time. The format holder will have 100 to 200 titles that it's managing, and then the retailer will have 750 millions plus if you're on the App Store. Players themselves, on average, are buying about 5 to 10 games a year. So there's quite a lot of competition in there, and the selling message is really important. It's convincing those people that your game is the game that they should invest in. Your game is the one that's special. Yours is the one that they should fund, that they should make new and noteworthy in the store. So that's the value chains. So I thought I would cover very quickly the key trends that we've been seeing in the games industry recently. So I've talked a bit about the indie revolution. So in the transition from the last round of consoles to the new current gen consoles, we saw a lot of closures and downsizing of medium-sized developers, which kind of seems, it happens every cycle, where the publishers all stand back and go, well, we're not really quite sure how much money we should invest in titles, we're not sure how big our portfolio should be, we'll hold back and not sign so much this time round, and we'll bet on our big pillar titles, and we'll see how the new generation of hardware does, how many unit sales that they get. And in the process of doing that, a lot of medium-sized studios ended up shutting down because there was no business, there was no work. That fueled really the indie boom that we've seen. Digital distribution, middleware, and new formats have basically created a lower barrier to entry for everybody. You've got tools that we had to use to build from scratch. You've now got Unreal, you've got Unity, you can build and get a prototype running in a matter of days, if not weeks. It's a really, really quick process to build games now, fairly complex games. The overheads are less, the hardware costs and software costs have really come down. Well, Unity and Unreal are free. So that's given indies the chance to experiment and make games that are a bit more unique, a bit more individual, and take risks that the big studios currently aren't doing. Because when they're betting millions, if not hundreds of millions, on making a title, they go relatively safe with the titles that they're looking at. There are 174, I didn't realise that, 174 graduate games courses in the UK. So there's a lot of people coming through these courses developing games, which is actually great because you're at a stage where you can do this quite cheaply, where it comes down to the skills and ideas that you have. And it's quite easy to work remotely, connected to other people within your team. Also, platforms, technology, and the audience is still rapidly evolving. So I will just skip this, just to give you, I mean, I'm sure you all play indie games, you know what the variety and the more unique nature of indie games are. So big data, one of the great things that we've got now is a greater connection to the players. We now have an ability not to build what we think the players want or what the publisher thinks the players want, but actually find out what the players actually want. What are they playing in your game? What are they not playing in your game? Where do you need to spend your time refining your game? Which is really powerful stuff. It gives you a chance to improve the experience, knowing that it's going to be wanted by the players and noticed at the other end, and also improve your monetization if you're going free-to-play microtransactions. So you get to understand what players are actually doing. You can also now adapt your game on the fly. I'm sure you know most of the mobile companies now do quite a lot of A/B testing to test two different menu systems, two different types of assets in a game, see how the audience reacts to two different segments of the audience, how they react to it, and they make their decision based on which gets the better response from the players. So that we're making much more informed decisions about the games that we're building now. And we're developing new monetization methods, free-to-play, microtransactions, advertising. With a market the size that it is now, it's possible to be able to fund games on advertising, free-to-play with an advertising model, obviously providing you haven't got a system that blocks the advertising. Audiences, the average game player is 35 years old. I really thought that would have been younger, This was from the 2015 ESA study. What we're finding is that there is no longer a gender bias and there is no longer an age bias. The gaming audience is really quite broad, covering both sexes, covering a really wide range of ages, which means not only have you got this really large audience, you've got niches within that audience that are now big enough to support.
That's fine, that's planned. Doesn't mean it's 11.
I've overrun.
You've got a minute. There you go, all fine, that's planned.
Cool. So I'm running a little bit over here. So some of the other interesting stats, the two that I thought were really interesting was the most frequent female game player is on average 43 years old. My wife's older than that and she just plays Heyday continually. And the average male gamer is 35 years. And your average gamer has now been playing games for 13 years. This is a really mature audience and it is growing. So I thought I'd talk a bit about current platforms. I'll speed through this bit quite quickly because you know what the current console platforms are. You know what handheld is. You've seen really what I think is the emergence of handheld. I would be really staggered if there was another handheld release when you have mobile developing as it is. And mobile's also evolving into wearable tech. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. This is really important because the old model of building games for consoles isn't the only way of going now. There's a lot more emerging technology that gives you much more opportunities to develop games than we've had previously. You have virtual reality that has been chased for, about 30 years. You have the Gear VR that gets its a consumer edition release next month. You have the Oculus Rift, the PlayStation VR and Vive that are out within the next 6 months. Just out of interest, has anybody here played with a VR kit at all? Oh, it's a good number, it's a good number. There's a lot of speculation. My money is it's going to be a success. There's no way they can throw the amount of money and skills at developing this technology and it not take off. It's quite different to developing normal games. The things you have to learn on a design front are really quite different. And we have, just on the back of that, augmented reality. So you have the HoloLens, Cast AR as the two main platforms coming out. AR is not far behind VR, and the kind of games that you're going to be able to see on that, I think are going to be much more integrated and embedded in your lives. It's quite interesting to see that Microsoft, with the HoloLens, are not pitching it as a games device. They're going for a more commercial slant on it. Games will be a big part, but actually if you see the videos of the apps that they're demonstrating, it's got far more potential than just games. So what does this mean? This is my last slide, I promise. Morphing and crossing sectors. Games are evolving and the hardware is evolving, and you're beginning to see it morph across sectors. You're seeing it, you have the Wonder Book with books, augmented reality books. You've got TV programs where X Factor, you can play on your app at home and vote while the show is going on. You had advertising. In fact, one of the titles that I did was an adaptation of Pitfall for Kellogg's for their Crave cereal. You've got fashions and textiles with wearable tech. You have new low-cost mocap suits that are now becoming available where you can do real-time animation. And so you have people putting on shows and actually acting out those shows in real time while the kids watch the virtual characters in the world. And you have gaming and gambling. So what am I saying? There's a great opportunity here, and it's not just about making games for consoles and mobile phones. And thinking about your audience and the type of game that you want to develop and the way that games are evolving gives you more opportunity than just looking at console and mobile.
Okay, thank you very much.